Hello, my name is Jessie. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the academic coaches with the Learning Center. Today, we are going to be going through one of our Roads to Success presentations. It's called Prepping for Midterms and Finals. So whether you are preparing for one of those two big exams, we've got you covered. We're going to be going through the study cycle and how that pertains to creating an effective study plan. We'll also go a little bit into some active study strategies, but if you're looking for a little bit more about those and how to implement them, I would suggest you not only watch this video, but you watch our Study Smarter, Not Harder, Effective Study Strategies video as well. But we're going to go ahead and get started with this one. So before we dive into all those strategies, first just going over a brief overview, if you're new to us or to PSU, about the services that we offer at the Learning Center. When we are not remote, we offer on-campus tutoring, but also online remote tutoring through Zoom. And our tutoring is peer tutoring, and we do it through STEM classes, world language classes, and even a few of the arts and letters. We are offering economics, psychology, and sociology tutoring at the moment. We also have a college success course that's in the University Studies program. You can take that if you are a freshman, senior, any level at PSU. It's open to everyone. We do academic coaching, which is one-on-one meeting with a coach to discuss things like motivation, time management, reading strategies, study strategies. So you can make an appointment to meet with a coach and discuss any of those things. And then obviously we have our Roads to Success presentations, which you're watching right now. So the objectives for this specific workshop are to understand the importance of both self-regulation theory and the study cycle as it relates to your studying. We're going to talk about specific time management and studying strategies and why they are so important during exam periods. And we're also hoping that you'll be able to apply these strategies specifically to creating your own plan for exams. So I'm starting off with the study cycle, and you'll notice that there are a few steps missing in this one. And I wanted to just highlight that for most of us in a university setting, when we're thinking about studying or academic success, these two steps are the ones that I think tend to come to mind first. We know it's super important to attend class, and also we know that you cannot succeed on an exam without doing some studying beforehand. But if we're looking at the full study cycle, if you are trying to be as effective as possible in your learning, all of these pieces need to be incorporated. So that first step, previewing any notes or learning objectives or materials you get before a lecture, then going to the lecture and actually hearing about those things in person from your professor, doing the review afterwards, and this is not only once, but often. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The studying piece that we are all familiar with, and then the assessment, which is just taking a little bit of time to reflect on how this whole process went and what went really well, and also what are some things we might want to change next time. So now we're going to link this to self-regulation theory, and you'll notice there are a couple parts of it that are very similar. So we have the before, which is our goal setting. So taking time to think about what do we want out of this term, out of this class, out of this degree. We need to know where we're going in order to implement the strategies to get there. Then we have the performance piece. This is where we're applying our active learning and study strategies that we're going to be talking about. And then this after self-reflection piece, which is very similar to the assessment that we just talked about in the study cycle. We're doing some evaluating and reflecting on what worked and what we can change next time. So all that being said, we're going to get started with this first piece, which is goal setting, our step one in this whole process. And we're going to talk about two different types of goals. So the first one are our outcome goals, and these are the ones that we all tend to have at the beginning of a term. These are our big picture goals. You want to get an A in a certain class, or to achieve a certain GPA. It might be to get a certain job after graduation. So these are the bigger outcomes we're hoping for. And then the process goals are the ones that are the action steps that we can tangibly write down or point to that are going to be the things that get us there. So for example, when we're thinking about exams, if we're talking about getting an A in, for example, maybe at like a biochem class, what are a few steps necessary to get that A? Well, if we are making our goal around midterms in the term, it might be that we know we need to meet with a tutor before we take that midterm exam. It might be that we know that we need to go to office hours or to plan out our week better, have a little bit better time management so that we have hours in the week to be studying for the exam. These are all specific action steps that you can take that would count as your process goals. And so we have a little sheet that you can use to do this. It's named the midterm check-in, but honestly, I think it's good to do either before you're heading into midterms or before finals, because it's always good to just kind of check in with yourself and see how you're doing in a class so that we can set those action steps. And so you can take out a pen and paper right now and write down each of these different categories on your own, or the sheet should also be available on our website under academic coaching resources. So just an example of how to go through this, I had mentioned biochem is going to be our hypothetical class that we're in tonight. So biochem is the class we're in. We're thinking our approximate midterm grade, or if you're doing this before finals, you know, what grade do I think I have right now? Thinking we're at maybe like a B+ or an A-, but we want to get an A. That's our outcome goal. So then we're taking stock of what things are left in the term. What are our opportunities to, you know, get the rest of the points that we need to bump us up to that A. If you're at midterms, you're obviously going to have a lot more things left over, whereas at finals, you know, maybe you just have one more lab report to submit and then the final exam. So in those circumstances, we're really trying to figure out what are those action steps that we can take to make sure we're doing our very best on these last remaining assignments. Once we've done our goal setting and our kind of reflection of where we're going, we want to start putting things in place in our self-regulation cycle. This is the doing, the performance. So first we want to establish a structure, exploring the when and the what. So when we are talking about this time management piece and when are we going to be doing all of this studying, it's important to take a step back and recognize that studying, or your academics in general, are just one piece in the puzzle, that you have a lot of different things going on in your week and in your life. So taking a couple seconds to think about what are all of the different things that you have going on right now that might impact the number of hours you have in a week to be studying. So for example, it might be a job, an internship, taking care of other people, taking care of yourself. What are some of those things you're doing to de-stress when you're not studying? And then also we have highlighted here with the star, once we've added all of those things to a schedule, where are the blank areas in our week that we can designate specifically as study blocks? This is just one example of a way that you could do this. Again, you can find this type of blank spreadsheet in our resources section on our website. You can also use Google Calendar to create something like this. But I created this with a student based on doing something very similar to the agenda map we just went through. And again, just putting things on one at a time. Where are my classes in the week? Where's my job? But then making sure we're identifying specific points in your week that you are going to set aside as your focused study time, so that we know when that's going to happen. We're making studying as an activity a tangible thing, and not just something that we have to do this week at some point whenever it gets done. So once we've designated what time in our week we're going to set aside for focused studying, it's also important to have a plan for what you're going to do during that time, because like I said, studying can be a difficult task to accomplish because it's not one that you can kind of just check off and be like, okay, I'm completely done. This task is finished. It rarely ever feels finished. So we want to make sure we're going into our sessions with a focus and a goal in mind of what we're going to do during that time. So we're being efficient. We're not just wasting that time. So this model is going to add up to 60 minutes. If you have, you know, a 2 or 3 hour block set aside on your calendar, I recommend just doing this 2 or 3 times over. So the first step in this, you're going to recognize it's very similar to self-regulation theory and the study cycle. So the first step is going to be setting a goal. Takes a minute. You can either just do it in your head or on a sticky note. What is a tangible thing that you want to accomplish by the end of this 1 hour? Maybe it's reviewing a certain amount of chapters. Maybe it's getting through a certain amount of practice questions that we need to. Set that goal, and then we're going to come back to it later. The next step is the studying, doing any of the active study strategies that we're going to go over next in this presentation. This, you notice, is kind of big range of time, 30 to 50 minutes, but you just kind of need to decide what your own attention span is, and how long you can kind of focus and study for without needing a break. Then we're going to take that break. Especially during remote learning, it's important to be thinking about how we can get away from the screen for 5 to 10 minutes. Maybe we need to hydrate ourselves, go for a walk, something like that. Letting our brains process all the information we were just taking in. And then taking a second to review before we go back and continue to study. So this is coming back to that goal, saying, did we accomplish this? Yes or no? If yes, check, set a new goal, let's go again. And if not, what small changes can we make so that we are using this next hour more efficiently, so that the whole 3-hour time span doesn't have to be inefficient. We're now learning from our mistakes. We're putting our phone on airplane mode, or we are realizing that this is going to take longer than we needed or that we thought. So we need to be creating larger blocks of time in our day or in our weekend to make sure we're getting through all the material that we need to. All right, step 3, we're going to dive specifically into your study style and some active strategies you can use while studying. So this is the how and the why. So first of all, it's important to know what your learning preferences are and your learning style. We actually have a learning style assessment on the Learning Center website that you can take and kind of figure this out for yourself. But we do have a couple different categories. People either tend to be visual learners, and again, this could be graphic, which is more like images, wanting to draw things out. Could be more textual, which means that you're a big list person. It's good for you to be able to rewrite ideas and concepts and take practice questions and tests. Or you could be someone that's more auditory. And so this would mean that talking through the material with a peer or a tutor is really helpful. Maybe just listening to your lectures back. You don't even necessarily need to be looking at the slides, but you can listen to them. So these are our auditory or our verbal processors. And then kinesthetic are learners who like to do things more hands-on. They like to be tactile with learning, to utilize more of their senses, maybe to be moving around a little bit, maybe taking more frequent breaks. So all of these things are really important to know what ways we take in information the most so that we can then figure out what ways we're going to retain information the most. So I told you we were going to come back to this piece about reviewing, and I like to use this typical forgetting curve for newly learned information to demonstrate this. The important thing to be looking at here is that when we first learn information, we're at that 100% of understanding the information. If we are not reviewing it at all, again, for the next 3 days, we've already lost about 50% of that information. And so if we're able to review that information within the first 24 hours in any way, whether it is listening back to the lecture or just looking over the notes that you had taken, talking it through with a friend, you're already making that curve so much less steep. You're going to remember that same amount of information, but for now, for about a week as opposed to 3 days. And you can tell that each time you're reviewing the information, that curve is going to get less and less steep until it evens out. And we would say that when it evens out, that is typically, when something is in your longer term memory as opposed to just your short term memory. So thinking about how we can apply that to studying for exams, specifically midterms and finals, we want to make sure that we're incorporating that into how we are going through all the different topics that are going to be covered. It might not be enough to just look through each chapter once again and be like, yep, got it. Because what we know about our brains and how we process information, and especially how we retain information, is that one pass of a topic, it's very rarely enough to actually have it stick and to be in your long-term memory. So this is another resource that's on our website. Again, you could just create this with a notepad or an Excel spreadsheet, but going through for each class, figuring out what topics you're going to need to look at for the exam, and then having check boxes of how many times have you looked at these things. You can, check them off. You could also color code it. I've seen people do, first pass, I was green, it was awesome. Second pass, I didn't feel as good about it. I still had to look back at other things, maybe that was yellow. Going through and deciding how you're feeling about the different topics so that you have a better idea of the day before the exam, what are those last things we need to look over. I've mentioned this idea of active study strategies a couple times now, and so now I just want to define it so that we know exactly what we're talking about. When we are taking in information, most of the ways we learn are inherently passive unless we're doing something to make them active. So for example, when we're reading something, we're listening to a lecture, we're watching a YouTube video, we are taking in that information, but we're not asking our brain to do anything with that information to produce output. And so we might be taking it in, but we are not actually doing anything with that content. And so when we're studying, we want to make sure that we are actively engaging ourselves and that we are doing some of these things that ask our brains to actively engage with the material. So for example, when you are studying with a friend or a tutor, you are explaining things, you're asking each other questions, you're defining things. Same goes with note cards or flashcards when you're having to define a phrase. Taking a practice test is a great way to actively engage with the material. All of this to say, and hopefully this is a pretty easy question, are exams an example of input or output of information? They're focused on output, right? So it's important for us to practice processing information that way, because if you've been asking your brain all along to engage with the material and then create something, whether it is analyzing it or defining it, creating an argument around it, then you are already more used to engaging with the material that way, and it will be so much easier and take less effort by the time you get to the exam if you've already been studying actively. How has this changed in a remote environment? This looks pretty different for everyone. Some people maybe have been doing all of their note-taking and studying on the computer this whole time before we even went remote. Some people were used to taking handwritten notes or reading textbooks and being able to highlight tangibly in front of them. So a couple ways this might look different, especially if we're doing everything on a screen. We have this new program, well, it's new to us at the Learning Center, it's called Cursewheel, and it is just a couple different ways to engage with reading and writing and test taking all on your computer. So if you are feeling overwhelmed by not being able to take notes as well on the computer as you used to handwriting them, if you used to like really highlighting your books, you feel you can't do that on certain formats now, this is a program that will allow you to do all of those things on your computer. It also has templates and outlines for writing essays. If you are taking notes through it, you can create study guides and generate practice questions. So this is just one example of how we are trying to adapt to what it looks like to be studying and learning in a remote environment. But know that there are tools out there to help you make this transition if that's what you're trying to do. And if you're interested in this technology, you can reach out to the Learning Center and find out how we can set you up with an account for this. So the last step of this process is the evaluation piece. I've come back to reflection and assessment quite a lot when we're talking about the study cycle and self-regulation theory. And so again, this is just thinking about, did I execute the process goals? Did I take those action steps I had laid out for myself? Did I ultimately achieve the outcome goals? Did I get the A or that GPA I wanted? And what, if anything, could I change? If we're at midterms, what can I change in my process for when I'm going into finals? If we just took finals and we got our final grade, then what can we be thinking about to put in place for next term, week one, right from the get-go, so that we are starting all of these really great processes and habits and routines right from the start. This is just one more example of a way to kind of be setting up those different habits and also thinking critically about the way that you're studying. So this is an example template of a study log where you would be writing down, what days you've been studying for a certain class, how long it was, what are you using? So the study methods part is where you're going to be writing down, what active strategies, hopefully, so that you're being cognizant of, was I just reading, or, was I doing test questions and working with a group and those kinds of things. And then the most important part is this analysis of the study session. So writing down, and this again could be color coded. Maybe you're just doing green for really strong, maybe red for like, I really need to look at this again. But writing down what went well, and also what things do you think you really would like to change in the future, or things that we should be coming back to and looking at again. So just to wrap it all up, coming back to this self-regulation cycle, we went through some goal setting, the active learning and studying, and then the evaluation piece at the end. If you feel like all of this, made sense, but you would love to talk it through one-on-one, you can always make an appointment to meet with an academic coach, anyone on our team. We would love to create a study plan with you and to talk through the study cycle and your goals, or any of the things that we went over in this presentation today. So you can make an appointment by emailing me directly, or you can visit our website, read all of our coaches' bios, and we would love to meet with you and help you plan for whichever exams you are about to take. So thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you soon.